Hello, my name is Hannah and I will be presenting on Chapter 15, Workplace Memos and Letters. My PowerPoint is a little lengthy, but I've got a lot of different examples throughout it. I decided to do kind of a voiceover with pretty much me talking to you guys while showing my slides. So here we go. So the first part in this chapter covers memos. So the rundown about memos is that it's actually short for memorandum. Sorry, I have a hard time pronouncing that. Which derives from the Latin term meaning memorize, remember, and remind. I'm sure most of us are fully aware that memos remind readers about like important events. They give directives and they provide some instructions. They also have ethical and legal implications. They provide a formal written documentation about an event or issue too. Okay, so considering audience and purpose. When writing a memo, you must first identify the various audience members who will be reading the memo. So the purpose of the memo should be stated very clearly from the start. You should consider the following questions. Is this to inform my audience, to persuade my audience, to motivate? These memos, they're typically written as a body of an email message or as a PDF attachment. They're either delivered digitally or printed. More commonly now, it's actually digitally. Some companies and businesses still do the printed route, however. So it's important to understand both ways of doing them. So memos, part and formats. A standard memo has the word memo or memorandum centered at the top of the page, and it includes a heading identifying the recipients, the sender's initials, the date, and the subject. The bottom of the memo always includes a distribution notation if there are like copies being sent to anyone. And then you have the body, which should only focus on one topic. You should really try to content and complete and compact. Your content should be complete and compact, providing all the necessary information. There's no need to be providing unnecessary information or background stories. You want to get to the point. You want to get the point across. Your readers don't have all day to read. You want to organize the memo by starting with a short introduction and then a paragraph or two to address the main issues. Then a conclusion that suggests the course of action, or if you are asking your readers to follow up on something. So this is kind of the format of what we just talked about, specifically towards a digital memo. You can see at the top here that we have the memorandum it's not necessarily centered, but it's flushed to the left of the margin. It's aligned and everything's very neatly aligned, giving it the professional manner that it needs. So this gives a pretty detailed outline of what a digital memo would look like through the office. You have the two here, which is the name and the title of the recipient. From your name and your title, the initials and signatures for the verification, and then date, and then the subject. Your subject should be specific enough that it entices your reader to want to open the memo and read it. That's kind of where the struggle is for these digital memos, is that sometimes, as we know, when we receive an email, we read the subject, and if the subject's not interesting to us, then we don't want to open the email. So it's important to make sure that the subject catches the eye of the recipient. Sorry about that. So then we have subject line, the memo text, headings, graphic highlights, paragraph and line spacing, and then subsequent page header. I pulled this page directly from the textbook. So if you really want to get some more information about it and go into detail about this, you can. This is just kind of a very rough organization of how your name should be organized when going through memos. All right, so memo tone. Memos are often, they're like a form of in-house correspondence. You don't see people sending memos out to other companies to try to invite clients. It's more between coworkers, subordinates, superiors that are addressing addressing questions like, what are we doing right? How can we do it better? What are we doing wrong? And how can we improve? It's important that when you're doing these memos through your office, especially if you're trying to convey a change, is that people are very sensitive to criticism and they're often very resistant to change. So the tone is extremely important to avoid a potential disaster when reaching your audience. Achieving the right tone involves just using a little bit of common sense, understanding the people that you're sending this memo to. So put yourself in the reader's shoes, as I wrote here. Approach difficult situations with a reasonable attitude. Don't take an extreme stance. Try to be as biased in situations as possible and always be practical and realistic. So some common types of memos. So there's a transmittal memo, which accompanies a package of materials such as a long report, a manuscript, or a proposal. The purpose of this is just to signal that the information is being sent from one place to another, to introduce the material and to describe what is enclosed. And then there's a summary or follow-up memo, and this provides a written record of a meeting or a conversation, or maybe just a recap of the topic discussed that was not resolved at the time. You most commonly will see this after like big corporate meetings, or if you had like a pretty serious meeting with your boss and you guys wanted to follow up on some stuff that was discussed. And as I added here, it also ensures that each recipient has the same understanding of what was actually decided. So it's really just helping you verify what you discussed with your boss, your coworker, or your subordinate. And then there's a routine miscellaneous memo, and this is kind of your common memo. It could contain some type of announcement. It could be an update. For example, the book provided announcing the closure of like a parking ramp over the holidays for repair or upcoming rewards. So then this is an example of a transmittal memo. As you can see here, it's got our company header at the top, memorandum, everything is flushed to the left in the margin and it's aligned neatly. You have the to, the from, the date, and the subject. Right here you have the introduction, which conveys the main point of what the memo is going to discuss. And then we have the bullet list, which highlights the major items that we want to make sure that our recipient's understanding. And then the enclosure notation, it names the document that's being transmitted. So this is a justification report. Just to verify, this is pretty much just saying what I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. All right, so this is our next example. It's a summary and follow-up example. I often just, as I previously described in this, the summary or follow-up example is more of a, I just had a meeting with my boss and I wanted to follow up that the situation is resolved. And this is kind of where you would be at with that. So as you can see, this is sent through an email. It's a little less formal, but this is just kind of a summary or follow-up example. So we have our subject line, which is follow up today's meeting, kind of similar to what I said. And then you have the recipients here, and then it also has an attachment. So the first line refers to the earlier meeting. So you already know right from the start that this message is about the earlier meeting. And then the little paragraph right here, which would be the body, summarizes what we discussed. And then the bottom part requests specification action. So it says, please communicate this information to other members of your team. So it's been requested and that there be a specific action taken, and that's pretty much the enclosure. Then you can see here, which is critical to point, that they also CC'd the division chief in this. If you cannot see that there's CCs up here, as we know sometimes when you CC people, other people do not get to see that. This lets them know that there is another person within the memo that is also receiving this memo. And then our final memo is a routine miscellaneous example. So again, we have the company header here at the top that's centered. We have the memorandum telling us what this is. It's a memorandum. We have our standard header going on here. And then we have our first paragraph, which describes the benefit plan. So we already know right off the bat that this is what we're talking about. The second paragraph is more of a persuasion, like you're trying to get them to participate. You want them to, you're trying to motivate them. And then the last paragraph gives them the option to proceed with this. If they want more information, this is where they can go. And then we end with a nice little closing, just thanks. And then also, again, we have the CC of the manager of human resources. So now moving on to letters. Letters, we're familiar with letters, I'm sure. Most of us probably do not actually write them as frequently as we used to, but a well-crafted letter is appropriate when you want to personalize your correspondence, conveying the sense that this message is prepared exclusively just for the recipient, conveying a dignified professional impression, to represent your company or organization, to present a reason, respond to clients, customers, to provide official notice or a record, letters are often format for specifically legal notifications. So when considering the audience and the purpose of letters, so approach to a workplace letter is dependent on your audience. You want to begin by focusing on your audience. These are some questions I pulled from the textbook. So who will the recipient of this letter be? What is the relationship to this person? Is this a potential employer, client, associate, a stranger? Just really understanding who your audience is and what type of message you want to convey to them. The next is to focus on your purpose. What do you want the recipient to do after reading this letter? Will this be a job offer? Are you providing advice to them? Are you giving them bad news and you're wanting them to accept this bad news? You need to understand the purpose of your letter. All right, letters, parts, formats, and design elements. So some standard parts is, as we kind of discussed in our memos, and this is more of a formal standard parts. So heading and date, this includes the company letterhead, and then the place the date about a few lines below the letterhead, and it's flushed to the right or the left of the margin. So that could either be on this side of the paper or on this side of the paper. When you are using a personal address, you're going to omit your name because it's going to appear below where the signature line is. So inside addresses, 2 to 6 line spaces below the heading, and that's going to be flushed to the left margin. When possible, address a specifically named recipient and include the person's title. So if you, for example, were addressing me, it would be Miss Hannah. If I was a doctor, it would be Dr. Hannah. So always addressing them by their proper or formal title. A salutation is a 2-line space below the inside address, and that begins with dear and ends with a colon. So for colon, for example, dear Miss Smith, colon. So this is an example of a letter. As you can see, we have our company header here at the top, the date, Mr. Thomas E. Muffin, we use full names, and then Clearwater Drive, this is the person that we are directing letter to, Dear Mr. Muffin, colon. So then we begin our body text, we provide the kind of the meat of the message, and then as you can see here down at the end, we have the signature closing. So there's a complimentary closing, then the signature, and then we type our name out. The typist notation, this is for if somebody else has typed it and you, to let them know that you're not the one that had actually typed this. So you guys are going to initial here / and then your own initials. And then an enclosed notation to note that there is another document enclosed within this. Okay, so letters, parts, formats, design, elements, continued. Text. So you want to begin your letter text 2-line spaces below the salutation or subject line. So keep paragraphs short, fewer than 8 lines. So coming back to here, body text. So this is about 2 lines below our salutation, and then it begins our body. Okay. So then the complimentary closing, as you previously saw, this is 2-line spaces below the last line of the text. So there's our complimentary closing. That's about 2 lines below our conclusion text here. And then our signature is that we type our name and title on the 4th and 5th lines below, aligned with the closing. So that's right here. All right. So some optional parts that we kind of saw in that letter and we also discussed. One of those is being the typist notation. If someone else types the letters, your initials, a / and your typist initials, they'll appear below the type signature. And this is always going to be flushed to the left of the margin. We also talked about enclosure notation, indicating that there are enclosed documents in the same envelope. And this is just 1-line space below the typist notation. And again, this is also flushed to the margin. We also have seen copy or CC that's followed by a colon, which is 1 line below the previous line. And then we've also seen a subject line, and subject lines that we see commonly in memos, but the recipient is not expecting your letter. A subject line is always a great way to catch a busy reader's attention. Excuse me. Okay, so the following elements are formats and design features of a letter. They help make your workplace letter look a little bit more inviting. So for letter format, there are several different formats, and your company may have its own. There's digital templates, templates that provide fields for you to insert your name, your company name, and your message. Microsoft Word actually has pre-printed templates too, and so does Google Documents. You can actually go in and select a template before beginning your letter. So you always want to make sure that these templates are appropriate, and unless the situation requires it, don't add any type of decorative format. So quality stationery, when printing hard copies for an official workplace letter, use the organization's formal letterhead only. Uniform margins and spacings, it's very important using a stationery without a letterhead frame. Your letter with top and side margins below 1 inch and 1.5 inch. So what this means is that if you don't have a letterhead frame, here, I'll go back to the letter here. So if you do not have this, you want to keep your letter with top and side margins between about 1 and 1.5 inch. And then you want to also make sure that you use single spacing with the paragraphs. Headers for subsequent pages. So you want to head each additional page with a notation identifying the recipient, the date, and the page number. This is more of a formality to kind of keep everything in line. For a hard copy, when using, if you're sending a hard copy, use the organization's formal envelope. Otherwise, use a standard business envelope that matches your stationery and place your name and address in the upper left. And then single space these elements as well. So letter tones. Again, it's all about how we convey ourselves through writing. So you want to always establish and maintain a you perspective. You want to make it about the reader so that they're inclined to listen and or participate in for whatever purpose you are writing to them. A letter displaying you perspective puts the reader's interests and feelings first. And to convey that you perspective, you need to put yourself in the place of the reader. So if you're trying to convey, for somebody to get, let's see, like a new credit card and they're a college student. Why would a college student want a new credit card? Like, you need to be in that college student's shoes who's got, $15,000 in student loans and such. Why would they need a new credit card? So that would help you better understand your audience and how to kind of, gear the letter more towards them. You always want to be polite. If you need to express criticism, you want to do so in a conveys goodwill and trust in the recipient. You want to try to leave a situation with as much goodwill as possible. And you always want to make sure you're using plain English, easy to understand phrases. Don't try to puff up, or as most of our English teachers have probably said, fluff your letters. Just use plain English to convey the communications. And then you also want to decide on a direct or indirect organizational pattern. The reaction you anticipate should determine the organizational plan of your letter, which is either going to be direct or indirect. So if the recipient is pleased or angry, will the recipient feel pleased, angry, or neutral? Or will the message cause resistance or disappointment? A direct pattern puts the main point in the first paragraph followed by the explanation, and then the indirect pattern gives the explanation before the main point. So it's kind of up to you, and that's really comes back to this whole understanding your audience. So something to consider too is when you're doing letters with legal and ethical considerations, it's always very important to learn all you can about the letter's recipient's culture and preferences before corresponding. And you always want to be aware of using proper salutation, especially with foreign communications. Just because our communication may be dear, it may not be dear somewhere else. Be sure to always understand the cultural background of your recipient. Certain things that may be done in America may not be done in Europe. And it's important that you understand that so you're not going to offend your global communications. So conveying bad or unwelcome news, our favorite, right? So there are going to be times though when you're going to have to encounter unwelcome situations. I'm sure we've all encountered very uncomfortable, unwelcomed conveying of bad news. In these instances, you will need to decide whether to build your case first or get right to the point. Are you a rip the band-aid type, or do you want to ease it and sugarcoat it? So kind of, again, this depends on the situation and it depends on the recipient. A lot of people are more into just ripping the band-aid off, but there are some people that would rather be let down gently. So for example though, if you're requesting a refund for a faulty printer, you may not want to use such a direct approach. So now that we're past that, we're going to get into some common types of letters. So the first letter that I have here is an inquiry letters. These ask questions and they request a reply usually. These may be solicited or unsolicited. In an unsolicited inquiry, be brief and to the point, and be sure to always reference the advertisement or announcement that you were prompted to write. On an unsolicited inquiry, you are asking a busy person to spend the time to read your letter, consider your request, and collect the information and write a response. So this is an example. Yes. So our first example of letters that we have here is a bad news letter example. Let me get a little closer for you. So, and immediately the writer of this letter establishes a you attitude to make sure that the customer understands that it's about them. Then it takes the indirect approach of easing into the bad news and saving it until the end of the second paragraph. And then in the third paragraph, it speaks clearly and honestly without putting any of the blame on the reader. On our last paragraph here, it remains polite, and despite refusing the request, it still maintains that you perspective throughout the entire letter, which helps leave some goodwill with this customer, regardless if they're satisfied. So then this is an unsolicited inquiry example. So it starts with, we state the purpose in the first one, and then we make reasonable and courteous requests. So in my research, I encountered references to your group's pioneering work in solar systems. Would you please allow me to benefit from your experience? So it's a reasonable request. It's not too godly or anything like that. And then the writer of this presents a list of specific questions that they would like the reader to answer for them. The writer also leaves enough space right here to allow the reader to be able to answer those questions on the paper themselves. And then on our last paragraph, it provides a complete contact information so that our reader knows where to find this person, how to reach them. All right. And then our next letter that we're going to go over is the request for an informative interview. So this is just kind of like the other ones, but it's just kind of changing your dialogue. So in the first part here, they chose to get right to the point of the letter. So the point of this letter was benefiting from someone's knowledge. So then he goes on to describes related research, and from there summarizes the ongoing controversy and then politely requests an interview. So he kind of waited to the end though to really ask his question. So he kind of gave like the reader time to understand why he's going through this and then ask his questions. And then at the end, he also offers to share his findings, which is very beneficial, especially in scientific research. Okay, so another set of letters is claim letters. Things that do not always go as smoothly. Mistakes happen, systems break down, or companies make promises that can't be kept. It's happened, and it does happen. So these letters fall into two different types of categories. There's routine claims and arguable claims. Typically, a routine claim takes a direct approach because the customer's claim is not debatable. And then an arguable claim, it presents more of a persuasive challenge because they convey unwelcome news and they're open to interpretation, typically taking an indirect approach. So this is an example of a claim letter. So right here you can see in that first paragraph, it states the problem and the action that's desired. So this winter, 4 of the pairs of tornado skis I purchased for rental at my ski shop began to delaminate. I want to take advantage of your lifetime guarantee to have them relaminated. Straight to the point, we already know what's going on. And then the second paragraph provides details of where he purchased the skates, what type of skates are there, and what their registration numbers are. Very important to add into a claim request like this. Then it explains the basis for this claim. I'm aware that you no longer make metal skis, but as I recall, your lifetime guarantee on the skis I bought was a major selling point. Only your company and one another were backing their skis so strongly. This is kind of a persuasive explanation, but it helps kind of get to that reader about why he's requesting this and why he's going through this effort. Then he courteously states desired action. So he wants them to let them know about how to go about returning the delaminated skis. So this is an arguable claim letter. This one establishes very early in agreement. So your company has established reputation as a reliable wholesaler of office supplies. For 8 years, we have counted on that liability, but a recent episode has left us annoyed and disappointed. So right off the bat, this is a negative This is a negative letter, and you know, as the reader, that it's not going to be enjoyable to read. But they stated the point straight out, and if you're part of the company that is reading this, you're going to want to keep reading. So then it presents the facts to support the claim. So it kind of gives you that explanation that you need to be understanding, you know, why did this happen, and why are you disappointed and annoyed with us. So then there offers more support about like how we try to do this and we try to do that. They're explaining the situation to help kind of give more meat to their claim. So then it includes all the relevant information that's necessary. It only states the facts, which is extremely important when filing these claims. And then it requests a specific adjustment. So what would you like us to do about it? And the writer conveys that message to the reader. Okay, so then letter sales. These letters, they're typically written to persuade a current or potential customer to buy a company's product or try its services. People are often bombarded by sales messages. I know I am. So your letter must generally be persuasive and must get to the point quickly. You need to engage your reader immediately with an attention-grabbing statement or an intriguing question. So if you're sending a sales letter via email, that subject line needs to be interesting in order to gather the attention of the person reading through their email. So this is an example of a sales letter. It opens with an attention-grabbing question. Are you in the mood to sample the best Greek food in the neighborhood? Absolutely free of charge. Free food, of course I am. And then it describes the long history and appeal of the restaurant, kind of giving you a sense of what this restaurant's about. It maintains the appeal of describing the menu. It gives you some ideas of like what type of food they have, so it further entices you. And then it ends by asking the reader to take some action. So it's asking you to take advantage of a special offer while it lasts. So usually people are more inclined when there's like a decent sale like this going on and like, ooh, I should go get my free food before the time is up. So letters, adjustment letters. These are generally written in response to a claim letter from a customer. So even though most people never make formal complaints or they never follow up on their warranties, companies generally will make a requested adjustment that seems reasonable. So there's two different types of adjustments. There's a positive adjustment and then there's a negative adjustment. So for a positive adjustment, you don't want to quibble over questionable claims. Companies usually honor the request and show us how much they appreciate the customer. In a negative adjustment, if the claim is unreasonable or unjustified, the recipient usually will refuse the request. So when refusing to grant a refund, you need a delicate balance needs to be maintained in how we are addressing the negative adjustment. So there are two examples here. On the left is the positive and on the right is the negative. On the positive, it apologizes immediately for the inconvenience, offers compensation, and looks directly towards the future. Short, simple, sweet. There's no questions for the customer that's reading this letter. For the negative, right, it gives you, the introduction starts off with the facts straight away, telling you what's going on. Then the writer doesn't accuse, but she explains in a friendly enough tone so that the reader understands. The refusal is professional, it's direct, and it's reasonable. They give an explanation about why they're refusing it, and it's a reasonable explanation. And then they close as if helpful of how they could help further. So that's pretty much the basis of chapter 15. It really covered memos and letters and the different types of memos and letters that we write for businesses, just going between professors, for example. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is on Canvas. I'm pretty sure you can always email me in the inbox. I did a very thorough reading of this chapter, so if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer them. Or if you would like further explanation on some of these letters, again, feel free to contact me. And I hope you guys all had a great night.